The principles are basically about how can learning through another language enable deep learning to take place, because ultimately any kind of education is about the quality of learning. So what does that mean for CLIL? Well, it really means that we have to be very clear about the concepts and the skills that we are trying to enable our young people to have. That's one thing. And once we've worked on what those concepts are, we need to analyse them for the kind of language that is needed. Perhaps one really useful tool that's emerged from working with teachers has been what is known as the triptych, and that is where we see language as a tool for learning as well as communication. And that tool is really where we're looking at language of learning, language for learning, and language through learning. Language of learning is usually very well done because as a teacher instinctively you will try and look at the key terms that the learners will need at whatever age they are. So everything that I am saying is as applicable to kindergarten as it is to the tertiary level and university work. So that usually is really well covered because it's intuitive and it's what you'd want to do. However, language that's the language of learning. Language for learning is accessing all the language that any student will need in order to engage in meaning making. So in a school classroom, it might be how to work in a group, how to do certain tasks and activities. At tertiary, it might be around how to read text, how to collaborate with other people and take out key meanings from text and put them together. It might be about synthesis. The other day I had someone saying, well, actually it would be really good to enable learners to tweet what they have just learnt. And of course, in a tweet, you're limited to the amount of characters that you can use. So already there's been synthesis in terms of what has been learned and dealing with it in terms of meaning making. So those are really fundamental principles. Other principles are around the nature of deep learning, cognitive development. Deep learning is where there is automation and integration, internalization of learning, and that is what we want to achieve for deeper learning. That takes some time and it takes practice. It takes effort by the individual. It also requires languaging, and for me, languaging is where you're asking individuals to talk about what they think they've learnt and what they've understood. Now, I don't know whether you've ever been asked to language something that you instinctively think you know, but it's only when you put it into your own words, and not the words of somebody good and great, but your own words, that you really almost hear yourself and you begin to think, is that what I really mean? And when you're working in collaboration with peers, they're also listening, and it's around that kind of learning agenda. So that is another area which I think is about CLIL. And then we have the area of cultures, because culture is not only what happens when we use other languages, because it's who we are and the way that languages contribute to our identities. That's kind of in the bigger, the macro picture. But if we're coming down to the micro level, the way that we deal with text as in different parts of the curriculum is quite different. So it's enabling individuals to start to understand culture in the kind of societal sense and cultures in the more academic sense. I'm giving you a really concrete example. So in the UK, if we're doing CLIL through the medium of French, and the children have some cahiers, some little notebooks, the notebooks will have squared paper in them for writing. Now, this is a shock to British children who, if they're writing in something, they need lines, because squared paper is only for mathematics. And so immediately, well, that's wrong because, well, actually, no, it's not wrong, because if you were French or in some other nations, you write on squared paper. Now, that is a very, very insignificant example, but it is very typical of the kind of reactions that younger children have, that when they're starting to really understand the way that different cultures have very different ways of being. But actually, overall, it's pretty similar, but those differences are really important. And that carries on right through to the way that we behave, the way that we think, not only within our subject disciplines, but also within our educational establishments. So at university level, we might behave very differently if we're discussing something than if we were discussing something in a social setting, of course. And that's where your register comes in. So if you put all of that together, I suppose another way of saying, well, what is CLIL would be, and I guess you'd expect me to say that, is the 4 C's were always around. Let's not forget how we can define CLIL. And there are many ways to define it, and I'm not at all saying that the 4 C's is the only way, but looking at those different angles on learning gives you principles for what you need to do if you're deciding whether or not this is CLIL. And it's always about enabling individual learners to be able to access appropriate, sophisticated learning, deeper learning, in whatever topic field they're in. And that is what the job of the teacher is anyway. So there's nothing new in that. I also have to say that really this is about an approach, a pedagogic approach, and it can be as much about learning in your first language as it could be in other languages. Because for some children whose register is slightly different from, say, the schooling register, then you could almost say that academic speak is not their language. It's nobody's language. And so part of us as teachers is how we would enable all pupils to access that way of articulating learning.